What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm back, and we're on another episode of Boxing What If. Now, last time I left off, I said I had done another heavyweight fight. Now, this one's gonna be Bernard, the Executioner Hopkins, versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler. I said, are you ready? No, I said, are you ready? Let's get ready to rumble! It is Bernard Hopkins versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler on Boxing What If. Now, on this show, we talk about some of the best fighters and boxing. As you do know, I have my sports channel, and I took a break from talking about basketball, football, to focus on boxing. Now, we're almost finished with the first season of Boxing What If. After this episode, there'll be 2 episodes left. After this, it'll be Roy Jones Jr. versus, I'll decide who he'll fight. That'll be a difficult video to make, but it'll be done. Because I got to decide where I'm going to take that venture. And then, of course, there's the season finale. And then somewhere in spring break, I want to talk about MMA. Because I do love mixed martial arts. And when I'm done with mixed martial arts in April, which will be spring break, then I want to focus on WWE. And the wrestling greats in that profession. But until then, this is Boxing What If. Now, Bernard Hopkins got his start in professional boxing in 1988. Now, he is from East Philadelphia. And Bernard Hopkins did not have an easy life growing up in East Philadelphia. He is from the same place as Joe Frazier, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And he got arrested a total of 13 times because the guy came from a low-class family. The guy never had a good life, okay? The guy never got to go to Disneyland. Nobody singed him a happy birthday. It was get a job at 12 years old, pay the bills at 14 years old, and learn how to be a man at 15. So Bernard Hopkins never really got to do the stuff I got to do. While I was playing with Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figures, he was getting in the street fights for money, for food and water, and then he went to a boxing gym, same place where Joe Frazier got his start, and that's where he got his start in boxing. As an amateur, he had an incredible record, and then, he could have went to the Olympics, he trained for the Olympics, but, you got to be an All-American and all that other stuff, so he decided at the last minute, let's just go pro, and that's what he did. And his first professional debut, I think the fight lasted some 7 or 8 rounds, knocked the guy out. And then, of course, he became the undisputed middleweight champion. Like in 1989, 1990, he became the undisputed middleweight champion. And he would have, in 5 years, he had 7 championship title defenses. Because he was just constantly fighting people. And then I think in 1992, 93, he got the fight that was supposed to make him into a superstar. He fought James Toney. He beat James Toney. He was trying to fight Shane Mosley, but Mosley was ducking and dodging him. I didn't make this up. This is what Bernard Hopkins was saying. He fought Vinny Pazza. He beat him. There was talks for him to fight Thomas Hitman Hearns. Fight never got made. This is in the beginning of Bernard Hopkins' career. And the only person that was willing to help Bernard Hopkins prove that he was a real sure thing in boxing was his arch nemesis, Roy Jones Jr. They fought in a 12-round split decision. Bernard Hopkins hit Roy with some powerful hits, some powerful thunderous shots. The right jab, the left hook, and Roy won the fight and basically took the championship belt from him. And Bernard Hopkins was furious. Of course, he would get the championship belt back from someone else. He fought Glenn Johnson. He beat him. Um, and then finally, further into the 1990s, he decided to go from middleweight to light heavyweight while still holding on to the middleweight championship belt, something in boxing history that most people never do in boxing. He would hold on to two different belts from two different weight classes, and one of those weight classes, he was like undefeated for 5 years. Like literally undefeated, further into the 1990s. Um, and then finally, they were trying to do a Roy Jones Jr. Versus Bernard Hopkins Part 2. This was like around 98, 99, somewhere around 2000, and the negotiations failed because they were getting paid the same kind of money. They both were champions in the same division, same weight classes, and they were trying to set the fight up, and it didn't happen. So Bernard Hopkins went and fought Antonio Tarver, Magic Man, beat him in devastation, and then they were still trying to do Bernard Hopkins versus Roy Jones Jr. And it didn't happen because in 2001 or in 2002, Roy Jones Jr. decided he wanted to be a heavyweight. And you could see that mad look on Bernard Hopkins' face because he had fought everybody in his division, beat everybody in his weight class, and was still trying to prove that he could have beaten Roy Jones Jr. in his prime. Because at this point, Bernard Hopkins had a nickname. They called him the Executioner. Because when he got in the ring, he beat your ass like he was the executioner. Like, I'm not making this up. He would come to the ring, and he would dress in all black, come in the ring, do his stance, signal, I'm going to beat your ass, and then he would actually beat your ass. So he ended up fighting people like Oscar De La Hoya, who he knocked out. Like, he gave him a technical knockout. He destroyed Oscar De La Hoya. He beat Phoenix Trinidad. And again, he wanted to fight with Sugar Shane Mosley, and again, Sugar Shane Mosley did not want to fight Bernard Hopkins. Ultimately, the fight did happen. It just took another 4 years, and they fought, and he actually beat him. And then Bernard Hopkins had another arch nemesis, and that was Jermaine Taylor, who was undefeated. Bernard Hopkins was undefeated. And then Jermaine Taylor beat him and took both the championship belts. They had a rematch a year later. They fought in a rematch to unanimous decision, and Jermaine Taylor beat Bernard Hopkins twice. And Bernard Hopkins was shocked. Danny would lose another fight, and he was stunned he was stunned. Like, Bernard Hopkins was stunned to see what was happening to him. And then finally, this is like way, way much later. This is like 2010, around 2011, somewhere around in there, we finally get Bernard Hopkins versus Roy Jones Jr. Part 2. But it took like a decade later for it to happen. At this point, both fighters are past their prime. Both fighters are not what they once was. At this point, Roy was like a light heavyweight, so was Bernard. And Bernard Hopkins capitalized and beat Roy Jones Jr. Convincingly. So yeah, and then finally he had a fight with Manny Pacquiao, which, surprise, surprise, he did pretty good in the fight, but you already know Manny Pacquiao was going to win anyway, and Bernard tried to get a rematch. It never happened. Like I said, he finally fought Sugar Shane Mosley, and then he became the light heavyweight champion. And he wasn't in his 20s, he wasn't in his 30s, he wasn't even in his 40s when Bernard Hopkins done this. He was in his 50s when he done this. All of a sudden, he became the first 50-year-old African American in boxing history to win the light heavyweight championship. And of course, he would fight some of these younger fighters that he gave a nickname. He called them the next generation fighters. And as he said, I quote, "Well, Jerry, I'm 50 years old. I'm the light heavyweight champion of the world. And they don't want to see me in boxing. These young guys, they don't want to see me in boxing. They want to do MMA and beat me up. Well, this is the best way to get me out of the game, Jerry." Those are Bernard Hopkins' exact words. He ultimately retired at 51, 52 years old. Because he was whooping these people's butts. Like, this guy was 50 whooping people's asses. Like, it was unbelievable to see that he was in boxing for like 3 decades. That's a long time. He had like 20 championship title defenses as the middleweight champion, and as the light heavyweight champion, it was like 5 championship title defenses. He ultimately lost the light heavyweight championship when he was 51 or 52, and he started to call himself Bernard the Alien Hopkins. People was like, why are you going to go from executioner to alien? Because he's like, it's entertainment. But he had a great career. He had 55 wins. He had, he had he had a total of 67 fights, 55 wins, and 8 losses. Because ultimately he would lose 2 more fights after losing the light heavyweight championship. And this showed that at his old age, even though he was very far removed from his prime, he still fought as if he was in his prime. That is the man, the legend, Bernard Execution Hopkins. And now currently he's a boxing commentator, boxing analyst. And on his spare time, he does television, he does film, but he also is partner and best friends with Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions. That's currently now what Bernard Hopkins does. Now, his opponent in a what if is Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Now, him, on the other hand, was also another type of fighter. He had to fight at the age of 13, 14 years old. And he, too, never got to go and have a good, fun experience. Ultimately, we got to see where he would end up. He got his boxing start in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. He fought in amateur boxing. He had like almost 100, almost 100 wins with only 5 losses as an amateur. And he fought Sugar Ray Leonard like 3 times as an amateur boxer, and all 3 times he lost to Sugar Ray Leonard as an amateur, which would kind of go into his pro career. He would never get over that. Like, seriously, the guy never got over that. 3 times you lose to Sugar Ray Leonard as an amateur. That's 3 times. He competed in the Olympics. He won a gold medal, but they, saw Sugar Ray Leonard as the star a future superstar, and that really pissed him off. Like, it really, really pissed him off. Like, if you bring that up to him today, he would probably get red and stern in the face because he was just as great as Sugar Ray Leonard. But anyway, he comes in, and right when he comes in, he knocks people out. His first 10 professional fights, 10 knockouts, 10-0, undefeated. Most boxers never do what he did, just come straight in with 10 wins, undefeated, knocking people out. Like, he had something to prove. And of course, he had to fight and go to court for almost 4 years because there was somebody either in the same sport or in another sport or an actor. I can't remember, I have to do my research. But there were disputes of the name Marvelous because he was called Marvin Hagler, but he wanted to be called Marvius because the way he would punch you, the way he would win fights, the way he would tag you in sequences of punches. And he had to actually go to court for almost 4 years and fight just so he could call himself Marvelous Marvin Hagler. You know how difficult that is to actually give your own self a nickname, get sued, and have to turn around and fight in court for almost 4 years just so you can give your own self a nickname. Other boxers had nicknames. He wanted to give himself a nickname, and they wouldn't let him have it. And he's like shaking his head like, but I'm the man here. He started his boxing career from 1973 to 1987, so he actually got to see some of Muhammad Ali's fights. And he also was a huge fan of Joe Frazier. And Joe Frazier gave him some advice, championship advice, and ultimately he became champion. He himself became undisputed middleweight champion in the 1970s. I think he beat some Hispanic fighter, took the championship belt, and just like Bernard Hopkins, he had 10 championship title defenses. There's being undefeated before he won the championship, and then there's actually being undefeated when he won the championship. He would actually beat Vinny Paz, like he fought him twice, beat him twice. Then he fought Thomas Hitman Hearns, I think in 1981 or in 1982. He beat him. Like, he literally knocked him out and took his championship belt. That's what solidified him as the undisputed middleweight champion. Because he just had one middleweight championship and he turned around and won another one, so he was able to get it. Then, somewhere around 1983, 1984, he beat Roberto Duran. And then he just had all these other guys in the division that he would just beat out. Just beat all these other guys out. Until 1987, when he was challenged by Sugar Ray Leonard, who came out of retirement. A lot of people were upset because it took like a long time for that fight to be made. If you take a time machine and you go back in time, you will realize that Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao's fight took almost 6 years. And it seemed like it was taking 8 years for this fight to come. Like, it literally took that long for this fight to come. And Sugar Ray Leonard basically fought him, beat him, took his championship belt, and this is by far the most controversial fight of his whole boxing career. Every time this gets brought up, it's debatable who really won that fight at the end of 12 rounds. Like, who really won the fight? Like, who really won? Because Marvelous wasn't really in his prime at this point, but he still fought as if he was in his prime. Like, he was like in his mid-30s, late 30s, early 40s. So it seemed like he could have fought for another 7 years if he wanted to. Now, he did try to ask Sugar Ray Leonard for a rematch, and again, that's also controversial because to this day, we don't know if there was an opportunity for a rematch. He did ask for a rematch, didn't get it, and when he saw that he wasn't going to get a rematch, he retired from boxing effectively after that fight. So after he saw in 3 days that he could not get a rematch with Sugar Ray Leonard, and think about it, if there had been a rematch, had there been a rematch, he probably would have won the rematch, and then there would have been a Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Hagler 3, and that fight might have ended in a tie. We'll never know. It's debatable, okay? It's debatable, okay? To this very day, it's debatable. Now, I know Carcino will say otherwise, because Carcino's a huge Marvin Hagler fan, and Carcino thinks very different. I'm just saying the facts, okay? Now, I know my dad would probably say, you wasn't even born yet, brother. How you know all this information? What? I'm just trying to tell you. You know, I ain't been doing no sports on my sports channel. I know people on my sports channel is probably like, man, where you at, man? Make some sports videos. Now, what would happen if Bernard Hopkins fought Marvelous Marvin Hagler? Probably would have, I would probably say the first fight, it would have gone 12 rounds. Like, this would be the first time Marvin would have looked into a mirror and fought his own reflection. Everything that Bernard Hopkins does, Marvin does the same thing. Both are middleweight champions. Both tried to win the light heavyweight title. One of them actually did. And both hold on to a championship belt for a decade and a half. Bernard holding on to one championship belt for like 20 years and 20 championship title defenses, and then go on to win the light heavyweight championship, and to be boxing in his 50s, which only a very few athletes are able to do that. To fight off father time. Like, to be told you can't do it in your 50s, and then for him to prove everyone wrong, that's a feat and accomplishment in itself. Then you look at Marvelous Marvin Hagler, that is someone that could have fought in his 40s, probably could have gone to his 50s and done the same thing as Bernard Hopkins. So I would say the first fight Marvin would straight out win in a split decision. It would have took 12 rounds, but he would have won. A rematch would have came 6 months later, and Bernard would have had to change up his fighting strategy. and he would probably win the second fight, and it would have set up a third and final fight, and Marvelous Marvin Hagler probably might actually win the third fight. Because you got to remember, Marvelous always waited for you to fight first. And what I mean is, he would wait for you to waste all your energy in the first 5 rounds. When you didn't have no energy going into the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th round, he unloaded on you with a sequence of punches. And even if you could get out of the way of his left jab or right hook, he still hits you. Hitting him on top of the head, you got your hand broke. Like 8 people out of 10 fights hit poor Marvelous Hagler's head and broke their hand. So he would allow you to hit him on top of his head, and 8 fighters out of 10 had their hand broken. When people would try to knock Bernard Hopkins out, they broke their hand. So it's like fighting your own reflection. So that's what happened if these two fought. Now, if you're talking about in their primes, not past their prime, okay? Because if it's Marvelous Hagler past his prime, he might still win the first fight, and then Bernard Hopkins in his prime would have took the next 2 fights. But Marvelous Marvin Hagler in his prime versus the Executioner in his prime, he would probably take 2 fights, and Bernard Hopkins would probably just win that second fight and probably lose the third fight. That's how it goes if you're talking about from prime. Next time on Boxing What If, Roy Jones Jr. versus, what a question mark,